Addie Emmett from Elsevier, who is talking, and also I should point out, a co-editor of the special issue. So thank you for that, Addie. And he will be talking about turning visions into reality, as you can see. So Addie, I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nancy. It's a real pleasure. And like others, let me start by thanking the Harvard Data Science Review people for putting this together and for giving me my first ever paper. So I've never published before. So this is my first ever paper. So thank you for that. The turning visions into reality, what I'm really going to be talking about today is the process by which we've searched for data sets and then developed the metrics that indicate where their usage may have been. In doing that, while I'm from Elsevier, I must emphasize that the thing that's typified and characterized all of democratizing data is the collaborative approach. And the process that I'm going to be describing today, and I will identify this in more detail as we go through, has been co-developed with the Johns Hopkins team and the Texas Advanced Computer Center team. So I'm very grateful to those. And also grateful, of course, to our partners in the federal agencies who've been working with us. And we've heard from two of those already today. And I will refer to a couple of the data sets that have been already mentioned in that regard. So let me just see if I can move on to... yeah, I thought that might be the case. Let me just check again if my sharing screen. No. Oh gosh, bear with me, please. I'm going to stop sharing for a second and then go back to my screen. I'm not the best technical in this, I must admit. So let's just bear with me. So hopefully, Nancy, can you tell me, am I sharing screen now?
No, you were before, but you took it down. So if you want to share again and bring it back up.
I beg your pardon. Let me just do that again then. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to go into screen.
Now put it on the slideshow.
Are we in the slideshow now?
No, now you are. Now you're full screen.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I beg your pardon about that. So looking at this slide here, and I'm going to talk about the left-hand side, the data set to publication link, in a lot of detail, because what I'm going to be doing there is explaining the search process. First of all, though, let me just say something about the data sets. Data sets can be any sort of data set in this regard, but so far our process has really been working with the federal statistical agencies as we've described. So what I would call the data sets we've been looking at are really the sort of operational data sets, the Census for Agriculture, the Survey of Doctoral Recipients. I make that point because at this point, although we're going to see how they're found in research articles, we've not been typically identifying or looking for research data sets itself. It's more those operational data sets. The other point to mention here, and I think Imelda raised this point, she talked about data assets, and we've also been looking in that regard at more than just the data set, but it could be the report in which the data set has been referenced. Maybe the article is referencing that report. So the search process has to accommodate that type of thinking. So moving to the right-hand side, that's where we start looking at the value and the impact that the data sets have. So once we found them, what we do is generate metadata based upon the publication article. So typically, and we've been using the Elsevier Scopus system for this, but of course there are other citation abstract databases as well. Typically, we can look at the citations in this regard, the numbers of publications in this regard, and then analyze them by where they've been used, who has been using them, and that can work at institution level, it can work at regional level. So with regions, you can do that at country, you can do that at state level. We could even do it at congressional district level, although we haven't done that so far in these projects. The other element to here that would be very interesting to talk a little bit about is the policy citations, because here what we're looking at is if you like, a chain of impact. So we have our data sets, we find them in the research articles, and then we see which policy citations have referenced those articles. So we have a sort of chain of value, a chain of impact that we're looking at. So that's the sort of value and the proposition that we're sort of generating from the search process. Let me move on now to look more at the specific ways in which we've done that search. So the data sets of interest are typically, or have so far, typically been identified by the federal agencies and statistical agencies we've been working with. And Nick referred to a couple of those in his presentation. The Census for Agriculture, for example, or Census of Agriculture, I should say, and its aliases. So typically what we will have here is a sort of canonical name for a data set, and then a set of other aliases that we're looking for. So a sort of parent-child relationship in those data sets. And what we then do is look to search for those. Now, if, as Nick said, all those data sets had DOIs and were systematically referenced in a common way by the research community, that research or that search would probably be much easier than it is. And we could probably just rely upon reference sections in these citation and abstract databases. But that's not the case, unfortunately. So what we find is that in order to really identify where these are, we have to look also at the full text. So the search process involves looking at full text. And because of that, we look to constrain the search space that we are working in. Why? Because firstly, searching full text is computationally very resource intensive. But secondly, because we have a step later on in the process about validating, step 6 here, validating the steps, what we wish to do is to sort of produce a burden of work that is not too great for the manual validators. So we don't want to be providing them with a lot of false positive results from the full text search. So in order to manage that process, we produce a seed corpus of documents from the Science Direct database, another Elsevier product here, but it's just effectively our own publisher database of full text. We do that only in order to find a set of parameters in which to search Scopus. Typically, that is a set of research area or research topic areas. Once we then look at the search corpus itself in Scopus, we also have to apply license restrictions because Elsevier doesn't have the access rights to search all full text applications. So when we look at research, the full text for the search, we are also applying access rights as well on the full text. We don't have the same restriction for reference searching in Scopus. So what we do here now is effectively run a dual parallel search process. The first running string searching of the target data sets into the reference section, and then the machine learning models that those of you who were here yesterday will have heard more about, the machine learning models on the full text. Those machine learning models will either be finding specific target data sets, some of them search for the specifics, or they identify generic data sets, anything that can look like a data set. For those data models, we also apply another string search. Step 5 here, we combine those things together. So we combine the reference search results and the full text search results into one database and generate the metadata that I showed on the previous slide. The other steps here form part of the slides going forward, so I'll move straight on to those now. So the validation is quite an important step, and the Johns Hopkins team produced a validation tool for our subject matter experts to use. What we do for the subject matter experts is present them with the match, what we would call a dyad, but really what we mean by that is a match between a data set and the text within the full text. And we provide them with that match with a contextual statement. So a snippet of text of a certain character limit before and after the actual reference itself. And then we ask two questions, really. Does the highlighted text actually represent a real data set? And if it represents a data set, does it represent the target data set that we have been looking for? Now, if you think about how data sets can be named, and again, I think Nick referenced this in his presentation, sometimes you have words that are very generic or are used in a number of different formats. So that the term herd here, for example, would have many different meanings, not just an alias for the Higher Education Research and Development Survey, one of the NCSES data sets that we were looking at. If you look at this, you can see where we have the full name, that the actual search process has resulted in a very good level of precision. The false positives, we didn't have any at all. But with herd, one of its aliases, we actually only had precision of less than 1%, which is not very good and not very helpful for our subject matter experts. So a real learning there is how to choose the right phrases for when you're naming your data sets and thinking about how your research or the community of users who does that, may not be researchers, can use that and reference that in how they see their publications. So you've seen an example of this. Imelda show this example. The Texas Advanced Computer Center helped produce these using Tableau and the like. What I like about this is, because I'm very non-technical, is it produces a very easy way to look at the data. It produces ways of filtering the data by year, by research topics, or by looking at the data sets specifically themselves. So a very simple and user-friendly way of looking at the data. Then the Johns Hopkins team have produced or placed the data within an infrastructure they developed for looking at big data generally. So this Psi server environment, initially developed, I think it was for astronomy use cases, but typically can be used for any sort of big data application, has the data within it and produces a lot of tools like Jupyter Notebooks that enables those with a more technical bent to be able to explore the data in detail. The Texas Advanced Computer Center produced an API, and I think it was Nick's team used that in producing this 5 Ws of mass data usage that he showed. So the API can be used really just to interrogate the data, and then any sort of typical person who with the skills to develop in Tableau or whatever can develop their own dashboards. So as well as just the non-technical way, we have technical tool or technical support as well for people who wish to be able to develop in that way. Now, finally, and this is my last slide, Nancy, so I hope I'm on time. I just want to go through a few of the sort of future directions that we thought in this regard. Firstly, we'd like to increase transparency and the collaboration through the process. And we want to do that through the development of an admin dashboard. And the Johns Hopkins team have developed this one that you see here on the right of the slide. So what this would enable users to do is to understand how the process I've described is being operated and where along the process the search has resulted in. So it's a way just to build increased transparency in that search process. We would also like to expand the search beyond research publications to look at other corpora. I mentioned an indirect way of looking at policy documents, but there's also the potential of exploring how data sets are used directly in those policy documents by exploring the full text of those policy documents. You could also explore that, for example, in patents. The final point I would make in this list of future directions is just to refer back to Imelda's example, and that was about the taxonomies. At the moment, the research areas that we're showing are the ones that really are available through Elsevier's own tools. As Imelda explained, they may not be the most relevant for the agency staff who are working with us with the various data sets. So what we'd like to do is to develop taxonomies and classifiers that would be able to more proactively and more flexibly develop a way of classifying. So in that regard, Nancy, I will leave it there, and I hope that I've explained to everyone the process we've gone through. So thank you very much.
Yeah, that was a wonderful explanation and great graphics. So thank you so much, Addie, and thanks for all your work on co-editing this special issue. Next, we will turn to Stefan Bender and Christian Hirsch from Deutsche Bundesbank with a practical use case. Take it away, Stefan.
Many thanks, and Nancy, to be part of these great presentations today. And as mentioned, it's joint work with Yannick and Christian. And because we are Bundesbank, that means I have to do a typical disclaimer that our views expressed do not necessarily reflect the opinion of Deutsche Bundesbank or the Euro system. Saying that, we will start immediately. And yeah, motivation for everything is, and also motivation why Bundesbank is giving access to microdata, is that access to timely and high qualified granular data is increasingly becoming a key factor for research and evidence-based policy making, as we have heard yesterday and as we have heard today. And of course, there are research data centers, and I will come to that, who are giving access to these confidential administrative data as Bundesbank has. And the research centers from our side are a success story. So, and of course, and that is what we are doing in the second part of our presentation, is that successful data sharing approaches need to strike a balance between cost and benefits, and for all stakeholders. Of course, these are the data users, it's the data providers, data producers, and it's also society. And what we also want to point out, and we will hear in another presentation today, is that trust is needed from all stakeholders too, so to let that happen. So how is research data center working? Because I'm not sure that everyone is familiar with that. So that means researchers in our case want to have access to our sensitive data, and they have to select our data. So that is what we already heard, that there should be a good description of the data, fantastic metadata. They are writing then an application, and that means also what we have done, that besides the data description, which is normally the metadata, we also have introduced an annotator schema, which means that you have a machine-readable system how you can access the data, which is you can add that to the classical metadata schemas. And then there's from our team here an application review. Then there, after everything is done, there's a contract. And I have to say that in the contract, there's, for example, also included how the researchers should cite the data set. And there's also the digital object identifier in the data set, but not everyone is doing that. And then, of course, the data provision is done, and then you are moving into the secure environment at an RDC, where you are doing your research, you are analyzing the data, and then before the results are coming out, there's a statistical disclosure control, and then there's a publication checking afterwards for some of the research data centers. And of course, the research data center team is supporting in all of that steps the researcher, and that is how this system is working. And Bundesbank, just to give a small glimpse on that, is offering the data for free for non-commercial research. And as I said, the microdata are highly sensitive because you get detailed information on banks, companies, securities and households. So, and of course, you can even link these universe of data sets, and there are over 50 data sets available. So that is the research data center. But now we are coming to what we call the bookmake model in a German pronunciation, which is building blocks to design works enabling access to microdata. And you have heard from the presentations before that we have to deal with the data preparation and data access part, which is before, for example, you're doing the analysis of the data or you're getting access to our research data center. Yeah, then you have, after that, you are working with the data in the research data center. That's where you're doing the data analysis and the data output. And the last presentation we heard, and others before, is then that there is a value generating process after you have worked with the data and you are publishing these. And so there's a data user's value and also a data producer's values in there. So, and as I have said, we need trust in that circle. And you have seen a lot of circles yesterday and today, and they are all referring to the same. So the data producers needs to trust that the data user is not doing harm to the data. We'll come to that a little bit later. And even also the data user needs to trust that the data producer is doing not harm to the analysis, which means that that the data, for example, should have a quality, that there is no censorship on these, that the output checking is correct, and that there is also no misuse of the data user's potential analysis ideas by the data producers. Yeah? And also, as I said, also censorship and also these misuses on the other side. So for the data producers, there's a lot of papers with the costs and risks there. And if you want to see a little bit more on that, just Google on the 5 safes approach on that purpose. And now we're coming to these 3 blocks, what we have done there. So that first is laying technical and procedural foundations. So that is before someone is analyzing. Next slide will be then on generating safe results, which is then in the research data center. And then what we already have heard about generating the value of all stakeholders. So data producers bear most of the cost of the data access side. So there, because you have to make the data ready for the analysis. You have to provide meaningful descriptions. You have also to decide on the appropriate level of detail for the data. So if you are doing too much anonymization on the data, then maybe the data are useless. If you do not too much on that, maybe then the data are not safe anymore. So, on the other hand, the data user must determine whether the content and level of detail of the data are sufficient for their planned analysis. So that means they have to deal with maybe test data and with the metadata if the data are useful for them. And then we are coming again to the data providers. You have to implement technical and organizational measures to safeguard the data, and to that also the data can be analyzed in an efficient way. Yeah, you have to develop procedures for that and everything else. And as I said, also there's a lot of paperwork for both sides to come to the contract. And if you want to look at the contract at Bundesbank, you have to read pages on that. So coming to the second block, generating safe results. For example, a lot of the data we at Bundesbank are offering, you have to come to our safe sites. So that means, for example, you have to travel to the data producer safe environment. Of course, you have to familiarize with the applicable rules and comply with any additional regulations. So, for example, we want to have some programming standards or also standards of documentation of your programs and of the outputs, so that we can check that in a way. Both parties, data users and data producers, must incur costs for output checking. So we have also some possibilities for there. And of course, data users must also incur cost of programming. So Julia mentioned in an article that the lack of precise information about the research outcomes leads to a situation where public data providers are not able to communicate society value of their service. So, so that's where we're now coming to the last of our blocks, which is the generating value for the stakeholders. So first of all, we have to say that the concept of value uses object criteria, and therefore they can be measured independently of the data providing institution. So for example, as I said, there is no censorship. That means not every analysis which will be done by the data users is if that the data producers is happy about the analysis. So there could be also some criticism on that. But the question is how many value of the publication can be attributed to the data. And we heard yesterday, for example, from Abhishek about the idea of counterfactual data. So, but we are, sorry, I made a mistake here, that we are not really sure how in an RDC approach you can establish these good idea of identifying the counterfactual data. Of course, also what we have heard already, measuring the value of research becomes more challenging the further away you are from the research analyzing. So that means looking directly to the publication is a good one. If you then see how many is the impact of the research to, how should I say, a policy debate or to some other results affecting society, then it's going a little bit more in a diffuse way. So, so of course, and that we have seen closest in time to the work in a research data center are the publication, and then followed by intermediate outcomes, which are compromised the dissemination to and use of research in policy and practice. The two co-authors, Yannick and Christian, have tried with a different and more traditional approach to measure the impact what our research data and service center has. And they have done that by looking the knowledge production and capacity building. So knowledge production, we have seen that is only counting the number of projects that resulted in publications and projects. With other kind of data, you can even say that you are also looking at patterns and other things. Capacity building, we haven't heard about that, is, for example, looking how many identified masters or PhD students have worked with the data and then qualified to the next level. So that is also, how should I say, something which is for the wealth of society. So coming to the conclusion, and I hope that I'm in time, is that we hope that we have given you some insight that it's important to capture the full life cycle of the data access or data sharing regime, as we have called it, a PubMIC model, because the costs and benefits are not distributed equally among all stakeholders. So at the beginning, there's more motivation to the data provider and then the data researcher, and both at the end. So the conclusion is that we think there's a strong need to quantify the contribution of data to research outcomes. So that is the topic we had today and yesterday. And at the same time, there's a lack of knowledge to extract the full value of research, for example, through policy debate. And we hope that also with what we are discussing today and yesterday, we establish a new framework to help capture the full value of research outcomes for the research and for the wealth of our society. So many, many thanks for listening. And Nancy, it's your turn again.